News.
As the war between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza, the International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for senior officials, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The ICC has accused both sides of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Well, Ian Hurd is a professor at Northwestern and an expert on international relations. So we're really glad you came in here to give us a little bit of insight here. First of all, President Biden said that this was an outrageous move here. Can you give us a little bit of context here, and what do you think is likely to come from this move?
Sure. Well, this is the court that's in charge of trying to figure out, whenever there's an atrocity, how to hold people accountable. So it's really not that controversial. It just comes out of the idea that there are certain acts that are just beyond the pale. So raping people in prison camps and mass killing of civilians, things that we've learned since the Holocaust and beyond, which nobody should be doing. So that's what the court is aiming at, is just holding the people accountable who've done those sorts of things that I think everyone agrees are unacceptable.
How likely do you think these arrest warrants will end in arrests?
Well, I think they'll end in arrest warrants. In the next few weeks, the other judges are going to weigh in, and they'll probably approve them. After that, it's really hard to tell, but what it'll mean is that every country that's part of the court, which is most of the countries in the world, will be under an obligation to arrest these people if they appear in their territory. So that changes how people think about travel.
You're not going to be able to move, to go anywhere, pretty much.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, you know, there's been a lot of complaining and whining about all of this, but when it comes down to it, the people who are complaining are the people who are the defendants in a criminal process. Right. And the defendants are never happy with the prosecutors and the court. They're always going to complain. But the bottom line is there are certain international rules about how you ought to behave as a leader. If you cross those, I think we can all agree that something needs to be done.
The ICC prosecutor relied on a panel of mostly legal experts. Amal Clooney was in that panel here. Can you give us a sense of what do you think the actual justification is? I know it's when you're talking about civilians in harm's way.
Yeah, so the people have been charged with things like mass killing of civilians and starving people in order to punish their leaders. And what that panel did was help gather the evidence, which is pretty much out in the open. We've seen a lot of evidence in the news and from survivor reports. So the report is all pretty ironclad. The evidence is there. The question is, do people really want to live in a world where atrocities are punished, or do we want to let some people have impunity? I think that's a pretty easy decision for most folks. We don't want leaders to be immune from prosecution.
But the big argument is that they're treating the enemy and the victim the same way, in the same category.
Well, the court's not in the business of comparing between the sides. Just like in the Trump trial, the judge is not in the business of deciding whether Michael Cohen or Donald Trump is a nicer guy. There's no comparison across the cases. What there is the court looking at the behavior and the law. If the behavior violates the law on atrocity, then the court can step in.
In the meantime, President Biden is working hard behind the scenes and in front of the scenes to push for a ceasefire. What is your guess about how far we are away from that, and how does the ICC impact all of that?
I think the ICC adds a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to accede to some of the American demands and others. So I think a ceasefire is probably getting closer because of work like this. The real issue, I think, in Israel is the Netanyahu government is very fragile. It's composed of kind of extremist parties that are bundled together under Netanyahu. It's not very popular. And so it doesn't have a whole lot of time left, I think, to execute its military plans before pretty much everybody wants a political solution that can bring peace.
And quickly, what are your thoughts on the helicopter crash that took the life of the foreign minister and the president of Iran? How is this going to affect the dynamics, if at all?
Well, it's really hard to tell, but the Iranian regime is sort of built like an authoritarian regime to stay in power even when things go wrong. So we can probably expect continuity, but every uncertainty opens the possibility of something better coming along.
Relief quickly is starting to arrive via the U.S.-built pier on Friday. What is your expectation about that? Many have said that it's going to be sort of a drop in the bucket.
For sure, but think of the symbolism of it. So the Americans had to build this pier because the Israeli government will not allow goods to come in through any of the more convenient routes. So the pier is inefficient in the extreme, but it represents the fact that the Israeli government is closing down all the other access points, and the Americans really want to push something in.
Dr. Ian Hurd, Northwestern University professor and expert on politics, international politics. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you both.
Now at 5:30.